All right. Good night, everybody. That seems like I'm saying goodbye. But it is a good night, I hope, for most people. It is Sex Talk with Natasha night. It's Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Central, and I'm super excited for the topic tonight. It's very timely. Aubrey's coming on to talk and ask about how we can support victims and survivors of sexual assault, especially, I think, given the current political climate and all of the things that we're hearing in the news. So I'm very, very riled up about this topic. I have made 500 notes instead of my usual 100. So you're going to have to bear with me tonight. You're going to get a fire hose of information. And Aubrey's going to have to bear with me too, because it'll take a minute before we get to the discussion part.
Natasha, can you, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you double check you're on Facebook?
Am I not on Facebook?
I don't actually see you on Facebook, but let me check my browser again.
Live.
It says it's live? Okay, then maybe it's just an error on my end.
To say hello. Hello, Facebook, do you see me? Am I on? Do you want me to double check like on my computer?
No, let me go to, I'm just opening up a new browser. So I just want to make sure that you're on so that people are, because this is such an important topic.
Yeah, we want to make sure we're on tonight. And I don't know, because usually when I have it like this, for some reason, I don't see a lot of the comments. It's only when I have vertical. And so I don't know.
I went to another browser. I don't think you're live. At least I'm not being told that you're live.
That's crazy. All right, well, let me finish it.
Great.
Says your live video has ended. Post this video to keep it. Post your video to the group. I wonder if I wasn't on my page for some reason.
Oh, maybe that's why.
All right, I'm going to delete and we'll just start over.
Great.
All right. Oh, yeah, I was on my business page. Lame. Lame. All right, well, then I will probably not have a descriptor on it.
That's fine. I can make one in the comments.
Okay. Where's my normal page? All these things that I should. Thanks for that. This is why I have you, Ashley. Life would be hard. Okay. I didn't rotate my phone. Come on. Ah, okay. Stop. Finish. Delete. Sorry, Aubrey. Bear with us here.
It is fine.
There we go. Okay. I think we are live now. All right. Take two. Take two on Sex Talk with Natasha. I had started my Facebook Live on a different page that isn't public. So that was super helpful. So sorry that we are starting a little bit late. But I'm super excited for tonight because Aubrey has brought us a great question, which is how do we support victims and survivors of sexual assault? And I think especially given the current political climate and all the news and all the things that we're hearing in the media, much of which is highly distressing to me, I just think that this is a super timely topic. And I think it's so important for all of us to educate ourselves, whether you are a victim of sexual assault or not. Because the reality is that you definitely know people who are victims of sexual assault. And I will also just want to make sure I say that I will use the word victim and survivor kind of all along the spectrum, because I know some people really resonate with one term or the other, and I'm fine with whatever term people want to use to qualify themselves in that regard. Because of the topic at hand, I have decided that we are going to offer the entire episode on Facebook Live for free. So we will not do the typical, half of the way through only for subscribers. I just think this is too important of a topic, so I want to make it as readily available as possible. Given that, I want to talk just a few minutes about supporting this project called Sex Talk with Natasha. I get a lot of positive feedback about it, which is so wonderful. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that you find these Facebook Lives educational and informative and helpful to where you are in your sexual journeys. And at the same time, it is not currently financially sustainable. We have somewhere between usually 60 to 70 subscribers. And for this to be a sustainable project, we really need that number to go up to about 500. So please, please, please help me share by spreading the word, referring this program to your friends. If you watch and you're not currently a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Even though there are some free resources, I would hope that you would consider, even if you want to think of it as a donation, to help this project stay alive, because we cannot continue if I can't pay Ashley what she's worth and, also pay myself for my own time, I guess. And plus there are costs involved, like website costs. And there's actually quite a few costs, believe it or not, of things that we need to subscribe to ourselves to be able to run a program like this. So please consider that, because I really don't want to stop. I don't want to stop doing this. I love it. So given that, what is Sex Talk with Natasha? It's an interactive, kind of ongoing sexual education platform for adults. And it's sex positive and it's comprehensive, and we cover all kinds of topics. So we are always really excited to oh no, what did I do? Sorry, people. We're really excited to not have technical issues like I'm having right now. What did I do?
I think you're okay.
I don't want to do that. Well, we're not okay in how I am, how you can see
Oh, got it.
show large. Well, maybe I'll just do this manually. Can I enlarge this or not? Sorry. Ashley, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about your piece while I'm trying to fix this.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. It's another Wednesday night. I'm glad you're here. We do this every Wednesday night for an hour. It's an hour-long program, as Natasha was talking about. We have a lot of resources. The way that this Wednesday night works is we do it for an hour every week. And the first 20 minutes or so, Natasha, 15, 20 minutes, just depending on the topic, Natasha will usually give us some type of education. And then we always bring our guest on for the next 20, 30 minutes. And that's where the guests can tell their story, can ask questions of Natasha. And then the last 10, 15 minutes, we try to leave it open for the audience and for viewers. So as always, if you have questions, just go ahead and send them in. We'll get to them at the end. Most of the time, the first 30 minutes are free on Facebook. The entire episode is on patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. But due to today's topic, we're going to do it free for everybody. So you can either watch it over at patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha, or you can watch it on Natasha's live feed, or we have a Facebook page as well, Sex Talk with Natasha. You can watch it there. Yeah, I think that was it as far as the program. If you do want to see Natasha professionally, you can check out her online practice at Symmetry Solutions. That's symmetrysouls.com. So now I'll turn it back over to Natasha.
Now, for whatever reason, and maybe Ashley, you can figure this out since you're the host of the webinar, whatever I did, when you were talking, it didn't show your face. And it's not showing you and Aubrey's faces either right now. So, which is what I normally get to see. So I don't know if that's something that you can figure out on your end, or if I need to.
I think that's just because of Facebook.
It's not on Facebook, it's on my computer.
Oh, I see. I think that, let's see, 1 second, guys. I'm just looking at Natasha's Facebook.
Okay, well, I will go ahead and keep it on myself while I'm talking, but if that's not fixed by the time Aubrey comes on, I'll put it on gallery view so we can, or view, just whatever view, so that we can see Aubrey talking. All right. Somebody's saying that trigger warnings would be appreciated. What I will say about, as far as just preparing people for this topic, is that we are talking about sexual assault. When Aubrey comes on, I don't know if she's particularly going to share any particular details. I'm going to be giving probably about 20 to 30 minutes of just education, which will not share any personal details, but it will be about the topic. And so as far as taking care of yourself during a program such as this, I highly recommend that. For some people, there's so much already on the media and news that maybe you want to tune out and not listen to yet another thing that maybe is going to bring up emotions and problems or distress in your life right now. So please, please, please consider self-protection first and foremost whenever listening to something that has to do with sexual assault, even if it's educational like tonight. All right, so I want to start out by basically offering some very basic myths that are just kind of run amok in our culture. And they're so prevalent that they've just kind of been, you know, they're just kind of a list of myths that a lot of people are very much aware of. And I will be also linking to a bunch of things in regards to where you can find some of this information. But the number one myth that I want to dispel right away is that rape or sexual assault are not sex. Okay, so when we're talking about sex, that connotes consent. We're going to have sex. We're going to be sexual. We're going to have a sexual experience together. I'm going to have sex with you. He's going to have sex with me. She's going to have sex with me. Sex is a consensual, happening between adults or consenting minors that are adults enough to be able to do that in the states that they reside in. So when it comes to sexual assault and rape, we should not call those things sex. And those are criminal actions and criminal happenings that are happening and are, of course, very distressing and have nothing to do with pleasure or things of that nature that oftentimes get associated with the word sex. It's also very important for those where they're having some type of rape or sexual assault happening to them prior to any sexual experience, that they do not consider themselves now not a quote unquote virgin or things of that nature because something criminal happened to them. Okay, number two myth is, and this is one that's just driving me crazy, is that false accusations run amok. So there's like 500,000 false accusations. Everybody has this desire to do false accusations for either revenge or gain or some type of way of ruining another person's life. And the research very clearly denotes that there's no more likely to have false reports around sexual assault than any other crime. And in fact, even possibly less so. And we'll talk about statistics in a minute. So that's just a misnomer. And it's just driving me a little crazy to see how often that is being talked about in the media, because the talking of it is creating this kind of general, it's creating this general distrust for people who are coming forward and saying that these things happen to them. And the reality, which we'll talk about, is that it's so difficult to come forward and talk about these things having happened to begin with, that we are just upping the ante on making that even harder for victims and survivors. So it's just maddening to me that this is just running amok. Number three myth that's very common is that rape is motivated by lust or sexual desire, which also falls into kind of modesty rhetoric. So in other words, especially when it comes towards women and females in regards to how they are attired, that they're attracting some type of sexual lust. And the research is very clear that rape and sexual assault have much more to do with power and control dynamics, feeling like you're triumphant, and or attaining someone out of your league or out of the possibility of consensual possibilities. So just want to be clear about that. Number four myth is that rapists and sexual assaulters are weird, psychotic, mentally ill, or loners. This is actually not true at all. Predators come in all walks of life. They're primarily male. We do have some female predators as well, but statistically it's primarily male. And they play all kinds of roles, including successful businessmen, politicians, doctors, clergy, fathers, husbands, boyfriends, etc. So there's no walk of life or socioeconomic status or culture or race where this does not exist. And that's just a reality. Number 5 myth is that victims somehow provoked the rape or sexual assault and brought it upon themselves. And so in other words, implying that something that the victim or survivor is doing. So again, this goes to modesty rhetoric. You know, maybe I wore the wrong types of clothing, or I was in the wrong place, or I was too flirtatious, or I, said something that I shouldn't have said, etc. And again, the research is very clear that what the survivor does before the assault has little, if anything, to do with the predator's decision to go forward with a rape or sexual assault of any kind. Number 6 myth is that only bad women are raped or sexually assaulted. The reality is that there are men who are victims of sexual assault. There are, of course, people all over the gender spectrum and queer categories that are sexually assaulted, and women in general are sexually assaulted all the time. And what bad means, usually in our culture, is some type of reputation that has to do with their sexuality, like loose or promiscuous or flirtatious or anything of that nature. So if that somebody, especially if somebody seems to enjoy having sexual partners or having more than one sexual partner, people of that nature might be considered as somebody who deserves or was more at risk of being assaulted, when that isn't true at all. And we shouldn't even be judging people under those categories to begin with. Okay, number 7 myth is that real rapes only happen in seedy places, like in the alleyway or in the bar across town, right? Or in spaces that you shouldn't be in. And that's just ridiculous. So rape and sexual assault and unwanted sexual advances happen everywhere, including your workplaces, including our homes. In fact, the number 1 place for minors to be sexually assaulted is in their own home or in their own communities. So you just want to be really, really careful about making judgment calls on that. Number 8 is that if the person who was the victim or survivor of a sexual assault didn't resist, then they must have really wanted it or enjoyed some type of aspect of it. The reality is that resisting can get you killed. And so there's actually something very wise about an instinctual system that most of us have that tunes in the freeze response. And the freeze response is kind of playing possum. And so actually it's very, very common for people who are in the midst of a sexual assault to not know what to say, to not fight back, to not scream, to actually just kind of survive the event. And so people really need to educate themselves on what the freeze response looks like when it comes to this. And the number 9 myth is that date rape isn't real rape. So implying that if your perpetrator is somebody that you know or care about or are in a relationship with, maybe it's a spouse, somebody that you've been dating for a while, that then it doesn't constitute as a real assault. And the reality is that no is no, and consent can be withdrawn at any point. So you can be making out with somebody, you can be getting hot and heavy, you can even be in the middle of intercourse. And if the consent shifts and changes, all parties need to respect that. So at that point, things become different than a consensual relationship. Okay, so I wanted to just talk on myths. I want to talk a little bit about statistics. Because again, if you listen to a lot of our current politicians, you would just think that men are just, particularly men in power, are just so in danger of being locked up in jail. So the stats are that for 1,000, and I got this off of rain.org, which is a great website, RAINN.org. For 1,000, they said rapes, 310 are reported to the police. Out of those, 57 lead to an arrest. 11 of those actually see a prosecutor. Out of those, it can lead, 7 of them lead to a felony conviction. And out of those, 6 are incarcerated. So let's just start. There's 1,000 cases of report and 6 people are incarcerated. Those are our current statistics. So actually, I think that the fear needs to be felt by victims and assault survivors, because the reality is that, it's not something that actually white men in power anyway need to be very afraid of, unfortunately, in our current culture. Less likely, it's actually sexual assaulters are less likely to go to jail than many other types of criminals, including nonviolent criminals, such as like marijuana dealers and certain things of that nature. All right, then I wanted to get to reasons why people don't report. Oh my goodness, this is another one that's driving me a little bit batty, that, oh, well, if somebody didn't report, if it would have been really that bad, people would have reported. Such an uneducated statement to make, especially as the president of our flipping country. I just can't even take it. I'm sorry, I try not to get super political on these things, but if you're gonna be the president of a first world leading country, you cannot say such an asinine thing. Okay. So the reasons that are mostly stated by people who've been surveyed as to why they don't report, the number one reason is fear of retaliation. And not just fear of retaliation from the perpetrator, but fear of retaliation from the community or the system in place that also allies with the perpetrator. So as you can see very well from the responses that we're getting right now, that happens very, very likely. Because again, remember, most perpetrators are somebody that you know or is trusted in the community. So if you're gonna say something, there's gonna be a lot of people who are not gonna wanna believe that that person could have done something like that. We have a hard time realizing that people are complex, that people who do really good things or can be really great leaders in one part of their life can also be doing criminal and horrific things in other parts of their life. Like this happens, people are complex. And yet we want to stay in this kind of black and white binary position where, well, if that person is a religious leader in our community, there's no way that they could be also a sexual perpetrator. Another big reason is fear of not being believed. So that's a huge reason. Another reason given is that they don't think that the police would be able to or would want to help. So in other words, a distrust of authority, and there's good reasons for that. Some people say that they saw it more as a personal matter, so they didn't feel like it was necessary or that it would be helpful to report a sexual assault. Some victims or survivors said that they did report it, but not necessarily to a police authority. So that could imply that they reported it to maybe a health worker or a mental health worker, or even maybe a clergy person, but did not report it to authorities. And then another reason that is very typical is that they didn't want to get the perpetrator in trouble. Because again, if this is your father, your husband, your boyfriend, your boss, your whatever, there can be very complex feelings about holding somebody that you have mixed feelings for accountable. All right, then we're going to get to, finally, I'm just throwing papers around because I'm just so ticked off, sorry. We're going to get to ways that we can actually support people who have been victims or survivors of sexual assault. If you have somebody who is going to open up to you about something that happened to them, and whether this is something that happened to them, yesterday or last week, or whether this is something that happened to them 20 years ago, I want you to consider that just the fact that somebody's opening up to you and finding you and somebody that they can trust with this information is huge. And your role is not to be an investigator. You are to believe them and sit with them and just allow them to tell you their story. That's the number one thing that you can do to be supportive, is to believe their story. Number two is to stay away completely from the blame game. Please do not say anything that would imply that the victim or the survivor shares any of the blame of this having happened to them. And it can be very simple things that you don't really think through that could fall under this category, such as, What were you doing in that place? Why would you have gone with them to that particular setting? Why were you drinking? What were you thinking? Anything of that nature, you have to stay clear away from, because victims and survivors of sexual assault already have a lot of conflicted feelings about the role that they played in their assault, in ways that we don't necessarily feel about other types of crimes that are done upon us. And so we really need to help the victim and survivor place the complete responsibility for sexual assault on the perpetrator, not on choices that could be seen as not wise or whatever we want to do. And remember, again, that those choices have very little to do with the decision of a perpetrator to assault anyway. Number 3 is to really just stay away from platitudes, which are these kind of, a lot of times when somebody's telling you something difficult, your initial instinct is to try to fix it, make them feel better. And so we can say things that, kind of like, well, everything happens for a reason, or, well, you need to trust in God, or especially religious platitudes can be extremely harmful for people who are believers in a God or deity, because they may already be having a very conflicted relationship with a potentially loving entity that could have allowed for something like this to happen. So you want to stay away from kind of like blanket statements that are meant to comfort, when in reality, most of the time they don't. Number 4 tip is you want to stay away from forgiveness talk. Very often, especially in American culture, we jump straight into forgiveness, especially when we notice a lot of anger. We need to be able to sit comfortably with a person's rage, anger, distress. Forgiveness and forgiveness talk, especially if done prematurely, can be very harmful in the healing projection for a victim or an assault survivor. Number 5 tip is to support both taking or not taking legal action or coming forward in some public way. So in other words, don't pressure somebody to go to the police if they're not ready to do that, or to come out in their community, or to stand up against somebody if they're not ready to do that. At the same time, be clear that if that's something that the victim or survivor is willing or wanting to do, that you're there to support them and to offer any, kind of a safety net as they make those decisions. So just be willing to go either way and to not project your own desires of what that person does onto them. Number 6 tip, if you are in a sexual relationship with this person who is coming and disclosing this to you, so that this is your partner or a boyfriend or girlfriend or something along those lines, recognize that there will probably be implications to your sexuality. Even if the sexual assault happened years before, just the coming forward and talking about something that maybe a person hasn't really been willing to face for decades or for years will more than likely bring up some issues in the sexual realm. That's perfectly normal, and be willing to be part of the healing and treatment plan for that person. That will take, some time to do that. Number 7 tip, do not treat them as fragile. Although they may be hurting and wounded, and you can definitely step into more of a caretaker role for a minute, you don't want to necessarily treat them like they're broken, or like they can't take care of themselves, or like they have no ability to be resilient, because people are incredibly resilient. And oftentimes there's a lot of growth that comes with trauma eventually anyway. People tap into their own inner resources, and we want people to be able to do that, and not either feel like you don't trust them with themselves, or that they're not, that somehow they're not trustworthy to be able to be resilient. Number 8 tip is to obviously recommend professional help. When it comes to sexual assault, it's something that I would hope most people don't feel like they're weak or broken or somehow not strong enough if they feel like they need to get help that is more than just dealing with it on their own. Number 9 tip is to come up with things to do or to talk about that are not about the assault. So although you want to be definitely a person who is there and is listening, over the next week or 3 weeks or a few months, you don't want every single conversation or every time you see them to necessarily bring that up. They're a much more complicated individual than what has happened to them. And sometimes they'll need a break, or they might like a distraction. So if you can invite them to a movie or, have other topics of conversation that you can bring up, that would probably be very helpful. Number 10 tip is to educate yourself. If you're listening to this program, you're already doing that. So pat yourself on the back. And again, there's lots of resources that I can point you to. There's lots of resources. Make sure that they're trustworthy resources, research-based, evidence-based resources on making sure that you come across information that is going to be helpful for you and the person you care about. Number 11 is repair attempts. So if you've done if you're listening to my list and going, oh my gosh, I've kind of done some of these things incorrectly. I mean, join the club. Lots of us make mistakes along the way. So be willing to, go back to the person who trusted you with this information and just say you're sorry. And just say, I don't think I handled that very well. Or I think some of the things I said were probably super hurtful, even though that's not what I intended. And I've been doing some research and I realized I misstepped. So that can be very healing to have a victim or survivor have somebody come back and actually validate that they handled the situation incorrectly. Very, very good part of healing. And then the number 12 tip is to get your own help. So oftentimes, especially if this is somebody that you really care about and are very close to, their distress will affect you. But what you don't want to do is necessarily have them now have to take care of your distress, because that's not going to be helpful. So if you're crying and kind of carrying on and going through your own, maybe kind of secondary trauma responses, like just anxiety and fear and worry for this person, get other types of resources in your life that can help you be a good support person for the person who has trusted you with this information. Okay, so this is all the information I came up with. I think I've been talking for a long time. Ashley, if you say anything, do you come up now or not?
You tell me on your end, do I come up at all?
No.
Let's try, does that change anything?
No, I still don't see you. So I'm going to change it to gallery view.
Yeah.
And just see all three of us. And I'm going to invite Aubrey to the conversation. So hi, Aubrey.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for bringing this topic to Sex Talk, because I'm so glad that, Sex Talk is kind of dependent on people bringing topics up. So I'm super glad you did. Why don't we start with just you telling us a little bit about yourself and why this topic matters to you? And
great, yeah. I was really grateful that somebody brought up trigger warnings, and I know that a lot of people kind of have mixed feelings about that in general, but I'm going to start with one because I will be talking about sexual assault, and I'll be talking about my own and survivors that I've worked with. I am a survivor of sexual assault. I was more than one, and that's actually something that I'd like to talk about too. When we look at these situations, a lot of times, I don't know very many people who haven't been through either their own assault or the assault of a loved one. This touches every single person on the planet, and I want to make everybody clear, if this has happened to you, it's not your fault. This wasn't something that you chose, and it's a really crappy club to be in, but a lot of us understand. So I have been through it, and I now work with survivors of assault and abuse. Most of my work has been within the religious side of things, and the first thing that really brought me into it was dealing with religious universities and the way that they do or don't necessarily handle reports of sexual assault well, especially when it comes to things like honor codes and other behavior codes that can be present there. And that started for me about 3 or 4 years ago. And I've worked with a lot of people to bring awareness to these issues, talking about things like Start by Believing and other really great organizations that are out there. So just kind of connecting people with those resources and really helping people to know that they're not alone. So this is really something that I'm very passionate about, kind of just being there for other people because people were there for me. And so that's why I'm here today. And I brought this up. We've been talking about having one of these conversations for a while, but in seeing a lot of what's happening in the news and talking with other advocates that I work with and survivors that I work with, we're all kind of seeing the same thing. And there were a lot of concerns about how massively triggering this particular confirmation hearing is, for one. And again, not to get too political, but certain people who are in political positions of power who have, had accusations made against them that are quite credible. And it's a really hard time to be a survivor with the news the way that it is. And so being able to talk about how we process that and how we support survivors of assault and abuse, and how we can do better as a society, because we really truly don't do it well. And it's okay for us to be critical of our own behavior, and it's okay for us to talk about it, and it's okay for us to say that it's time to change. And so that's kind of what I'm here for today.
Well, that's awesome. And Aubrey, I'll ask you afterwards, after we're done, if you don't mind going on the Facebook thread and posting any links to either groups or articles or things that you found helpful. That would be a great addition. It sounds like you're well versed in some of these things. And I believe you had mentioned before we started talking that you're actually part of a support group. Is that on Facebook, or can you?
There are several that I belong to, and we talked a little bit about, we hear things like whisper network. I love that phrase. Whisper networks are essentially groups, usually of non-men, who kind of look out for one another. They can be very helpful in protecting other people from abuse and assault. It's sort of a, hey, I had a bad experience with this person. This is what happened to me. I want to make sure that other people are okay. And it's one of those things that women and other non-male genders have done for all of time. We have always looked out for one another. And so there are those groups. There are other groups that are great for people who have dealt with these things or who have loved ones who have dealt with these things. And really and truly, one of the greatest things that can support people as they go through these things are other people. If you can speak openly and you know that you can talk to someone and that you're not going to experience any kind of judgment or disbelief, that's one of the most empowering things.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning was that you have had, you're a survivor of not just one assault, but I don't know how many, but more than one. And so I just want to say that is actually very common as well for a variety of reasons. One is that, the definition of sexual assault is not, penis in a vagina. The definition of sexual assault is unwanted sexual activity. And so I think, and also we want to include sexual harassment, which if you start talking about that, which is verbal ways that a lot of times in specific women or minorities are in a sense, kind of bombarded by attention or comments that are of a sexual nature. I don't know that there are many people who would say that's never happened to them. And so then the numbers go up even exponentially more, so I just want to be very clear about that. So the reality is that most of us have had some type of unwanted either sexual comment or sexual attention or sexual physicality, put upon us without our consent. Now, the other reason why this can be very common is that perpetrators are very good at grooming vulnerable victims and survivors. And so therefore, if you happen to be somebody who was in a vulnerable population for whatever reason, that can be a myriad of reasons why you would be classified as vulnerable. The reality is that other people would see you as vulnerable too. So what's really difficult to hear is that many times if there's been like a person who's made accusations towards more than one person, all of a sudden that's seen as suspect. oh, this is obviously just a person who's out to make money or to discredit people because, you know, she has several people that she's accused. When in reality, more than likely there were several people that, that came to her life that way.
And I'd like to point out, I have never had personally any of the experiences that I've had have all been people I knew, either people that I was in a relationship with, a spouse. I recently shared on my Facebook page publicly for the first time one of my accounts of sexual abuse that the reason that Kavanaugh and all of this confirmation hearing is so triggering for me is because it mirrors exactly what I went through when I was in high school. And so I took to my Facebook page and I explained that. In that case, it was someone I had known since I was 8 years old. And it took place in the house of a friend. Their parents were home. It wasn't a wild party. No one was drinking. You know, all of the things that people have asked me, what were you doing there? Were there parents? Were you drinking? Those are those blame things that we talk about not saying. And every time those were expressed to me, it was, oh no, but were you? Because we look for why on earth could this horrible thing happen to this person that I love. We don't always think about how that can make them feel. But, you know, I have never had an experience that was that like creepy, dark alley, stranger danger thing that we sort of expect that to be. And really that boils down to just human nature. This is a horrendous thing. It's hurtful and it's violent and it's awful. And it is hard for us as good people to wrap our heads around the concept of somebody taking away someone's rights to choose about their own bodily autonomy that way. It's okay that that doesn't make sense to you. That is okay. But what you have to realize is that what's happening to that survivor in front of you is it already happened. It doesn't matter if it makes sense to you when you're receiving that disclosure from them. It happened and it was bad. And it's okay to say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm so sorry. That's perfect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think what you're really inviting people to think about is self-awareness. You know, if somebody was drinking, if they were wearing loose clothing, if they were being flirtatious, well then if you don't do those things, that'll mean this won't happen to me, right? So the reality is,
I'm a good person who does the right thing.
Right. And that's problematic for two reasons, because I don't care if you're drinking. I don't care if you're naked. I don't care if you're super flirtatious. Once you say, no, I'm not interested in having this interaction with you, it's a no. Yeah. And secondly, we already know, because we've talked about, those things are not typically how assault happens anyway. Yeah. And so those are not, we don't have a lot of control. And I think that's what people really don't want to necessarily face. You know, it's like, if I can control these particular things, either teach my children these things or not do these things myself, not put myself in these particular situations, I will be able to avoid these things happening to me or my kids. And that's just not the reality. And in fact, those types of myths actually make raise the risks, because we're uneducated, we're unprepared for situations that are more likely to happen. And we don't have the know-how of how to handle those types of situations to begin with.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that has become so prevalent in our society. But the important thing about all of these things that we're discussing is we're discussing it. And the more you talk about it, and the more that we bring up the heavy things, and the more that we shed light on some of the darkness, the better it is in future. We're all going, every single one of us who's listening to this right now is either has already experienced this with themselves or someone else, or you will. It's part of life, unfortunately, but knowing what to do is half the battle.
Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? So is there anything that maybe I didn't cover in my list? Because my lists are not by any means comprehensive, right? These are just kind of some things that I thought to bring to the table today, but we could talk about lots of other things. So is there anything in particular that you felt like I didn't bring up that you would have liked to have seen on my lists?
I love your list. My favorite thing to share with people is, what do I do when someone discloses to me? What should I do? Because there is that moment of panic where you kind of blank for a second, because this is someone you love who was hurt. The very first thing that I hope to hear when someone's disclosing assault is, I am so sorry that happened to you. Acknowledge that it happened and that it was bad, and that it hurts. I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I always follow up with, it was not your fault, because we do search for meaning, you know, that we look, why did this happen? I'm sorry this happened to you. It was not your fault. How can I show up for you right now? And because the answer is going to be different for every single survivor. It may be, can we just get out of town? Can we get away from my house? Can we go somewhere? Can we go get a pedicure? Can we eat lunch? Can we clean my room? Because that's where it happened and I can't look at my room right now. But be prepared to follow up with what they need. So I'm sorry that this happened to you. It was not your fault. And how can I show up for you right now? Those are the things that I like to hear when someone's disclosing it. It's helpful.
And if people don't know how to ask for help, because some people will just say, oh no, there's nothing that you can do. Just listening to me is fine. Be proactive, you know, and not that you have to be like, again, weirdly proactive, like bringing
Like you
up
have to fix it, but
right? But make sure you still call that week, you know, or maybe make an extra phone call or invite them to an outing. Make sure that you don't, because sometimes when we don't know what to say, without realizing it, we isolate, like we stop calling, we stop talking, and that can be felt as very rejecting in that sense.
One of the most helpful things that was said to me this week, the assault that I mentioned on my Facebook, and I did it right before the whole reasons I don't report hashtag came about, and I'm so glad to see that, because it's really humanized it for a lot of people. But one of the most supportive things that I got, and this was 17 years ago or so, a friend who knew me at that time sent me a text message, and we haven't talked in a long time, and they said to me, I didn't know, I should have known, and I'm sorry. And that blew me away. Because the reason that people didn't know is because I had a horrible reaction when I first disclosed it, and I went silent. I internalized and I didn't say anything for years. And so to have somebody recognize that from a Facebook post down the future and come to me with an apology was massive. I was so glad that you said that. If you're listening to this and you're hearing things like, oh, I did the bad thing, don't feel bad. Or, I mean, it's okay to feel a little bad, but take that and use it as a motivation to move forward. Reach out to the person that came to mind when you heard that information and say, hey, I was listening to something today and it made me think about that time when you came to me. I wasn't supportive and I'm sorry. I should have done better. And I love you. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I want to do better going forward. That means the world.
Yeah. I totally agree. Are there questions for me that you have before we go to comment questions?
I would love to talk a little bit about what can we do to change the dialogue. I sort of, before we came on live, I sort of mentioned a little bit, I'm hearing the same thing from every single person that I talk to in my network.
Tell us what you're hearing. I want to know. What are you hearing?
I had a great discussion with a friend today, and we both got really angry, which was cathartic. It's okay to feel anger. I want to put that out there. A lot of times we sort of try to minimize it because it's a bad feeling. There's no such thing as bad feelings. There's feelings, you have to feel them and get through them to get to the next one. We were real mad. When we start talking about this, I'm angry that Kavanaugh is the center of this discussion. I am angry that multiple victims have come forward and we're still talking about him. I am angry that when I bring forth my story so that other people understand why I say without a hesitation and without a doubt that I believe Dr. Ford, my story becomes about Kavanaugh. And so this is something that a bunch of people today and I sort of crystallized on. We are making all of it about the perpetrator. And that's something that societally we do. We do say, this happened to me, this person did this to me. But when it's part of a larger national discussion, it all focuses back to someone who did that. And that's really awful. And it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be upset. And it's okay to be hurt that somebody else is getting the attention when he's the one who is alleged to have done these horrible things. So there's a lot of focus on the perpetrator. There's a lot of focus on, I mean, even when we talk about things like people who don't report, why I don't report as a hashtag, it makes everything about punishing the person who did it. And yet again, a lot of the survivors that I speak to feel like we get pushed to the bottom. We become a tool in a legal case. We become evidence in a legal case. We become the thing that's going to put the guy away, or the victory for the DA, or whatever else. We're still people. We're still people who have to deal with this every day. And so, in fact, one of the friends that I spoke to today mentioned that one of her frustrations is that when we look at this, because the perpetrator who harmed her isn't up to be, a Supreme Court justice, does anybody care? And so, and it comes back to that. In my case, in the assault that I'm mentioning a lot right now, most of my friends from my hometown are still friends with him. He's gone on to live a great life. I'm not mad at him anymore. I've gone through a lot of healing there, but I mean, life goes on for those people. And so there's a lot of, but what happens to the people who survive? And even when we talk about survivors and victims and all of those things, I think we need to be a little careful about how we orient the story, that we're not taking the people who've gone through something so difficult and pushing them to the bottom and making it about the person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I that totally makes sense. And it just brings up a lot of different directions we could go. But the main thing that's coming up for me is the dialogue that's happening about how dangerous it is to accuse people or to assume they're guilty before they're guilty, right? Or before they're deemed guilty. And this is also extremely harmful for victims and survivors. Because imagine this, imagine that you are a victim or a survivor of sexual assault. And the way that the system works is that you come forward and we're not going to believe you or think about you or treat you or talk about you until it's proven that it happens. So people are really conflating certain things here. Yes, we have a justice system where you don't go to jail usually until you're proven guilty. And even then, in some in some crimes, you're actually put in jail until you have the case, in front. And then, but regardless, that's different than whether or not you believe victims, whether or not, and not going to jail is a different right than having a Supreme Court justice position, right? So, for example, in my particular school, if there is a allegation of sexual assault, the person's put on leave, on paid leave, because, and that kind of takes care of both people, so you're in case the evidence does come forward to prove that it's true. We've now protected other children or other potential victims from that person. And that person, because, they haven't had a chance, quote unquote, to defend themselves yet, they're on paid leave, right? And so the reality is that I think we're conflating dialogue that I think really does a disservice to victims and survivors in that regard.
It does. And that's come up a lot in a lot of the discussions that I've started and the discussions that I've been a part of over the last couple of weeks. What was probably the most shocking to me was having people that I know have dealt with sexual assault within their own families express shock to me that I would believe this woman without any proof, and that I would convict this man in the press. And that really made me angry. And I did say that in these discussions. That makes me mad coming from you, because you know my story and you know that how that hurts me. And so a lot of times we sort of mistake believing and supporting someone who's hurting for condemning someone to death, essentially. These are two different things. And it's okay to look at someone and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It wasn't your fault. I support you. It's okay to say that. And then even on the 1 to 3% chance that is proven to be a false allegation, it's okay to still love and support that person. For me, this is such a black and white issue. If someone is coming forward with a rape or a sexual assault or another situation, but they're lying about it, something is going on with them that they need support for. the fact and that it happens so rarely, but even if it wasn't true, clearly they need something and they need support. So you're never going to have a problem if you're supporting someone who needs support.
Right.
If the truth comes forward and that person's name is cleared, then their name is cleared. But the likelihood that someone is going to make a false report of rape or sexual assault is so small. It's smaller than every other crime. We have statistics that back that. And realistically, when you look at somebody like Dr. Ford, who's come forward in this case, her life is now completely different. She has, I don't think I can overstate that. Her life as she knew it is over. Everything that she had done up until this point of reporting is now changed. It doesn't mean that it can't be a beautiful life and that she can't do wonderful things, but she had to summon up all of the courage that she possessed to walk forward with something, knowing with full well that was going to change her life and her family's life, her professional life, and everything about what she was doing. So I want people to really soak up the heaviness of that and realize that if someone's coming forward, it's not because she's mad at him from something in high school. It's because the risk of sitting on that information was too great for her. And so she was willing to give up everything she had so that he didn't harm somebody else again. I've been in that position. I have come forward with things and like most of the statistics, not had it bear out where justice was served. But it comes down to, if someone is reporting, if someone is coming forward, I can guarantee you they have already weighed in their mind whether or not it's worth the death threats and the hassle and the pain and the disbelief and the re-traumatization that will happen from coming forward. They've weighed it out and they've found it worthy to keep going. So knowing that is important.
Yeah, the whole idea that there's something to gain from this. I mean, even for the very, very few people that might have some type of financial gain, that the social ostracization, and women know this. Yeah. Victims and survivors know this. This is a huge part of why they don't come forward. They don't want to pay the price of the community ostracization that they're going to more likely face.
And the demonization of them as a victim or a survivor as well. And we see that exponentially worse when it's people of color and when it's people who are non-male, the trans community especially. There's so many reasons why people choose not to come forward. And it's
usually self-protective. So it's not self-protective to come forward. No. I mean, that's in essence at the crux of why this is so problematic in our current culture. It is not self-protective. We don't have a system that has allowed it to be self-protective to come forward. In fact, you're taking a risk to come forward. And that
someone who's a survivor by saying, well, you're clearly doing this out of spite, or you're clearly doing this to gain something, that is probably one of the most hurtful things you can do to another person. It costs you nothing to care and be kind.
And the language I'm hearing too is this whole, because it's in the political realm, and it's, I hear the term smear campaign. This is just part of a smear campaign, and I really want to be very cautious. It happens to be a Republican, type of issue right now, so it's easy to say this is the Democrats, start your campaign. This could very easily be on the other side. So it's not, for me as a professional, I am very aware that your political leanings have nothing to do with your statistical ability to be a perpetrator, right? So, I mean, this can happen, again, that goes back to my number one statistic list. This happens across the board. This is not Republicans are, sexual predators, or Democrats are, or anything like that. This happens.
It's nonpartisan
of who was in office right now. So again, I feel like that's a very easy way to minimize a survivor or a victim story, is that, this is just part of a smear campaign. Again, we're not going to, these people that we hold up that currently are on our side, remember in 4 or 8 years, it could be on the other side. The same conversation could be happening. It just, again, silences the actual story, because after all, it's only a smear campaign. So it's very problematic how we.
And I do want to touch on that just a little bit too, and to kind of bring back an earlier point of yours. with the whole, I'm seeing a hashtag today that really makes me angry and makes my blood boil. It's that hashtag him too, and being worried about all the men in your life. And we're seeing celebrities come forward and say things like, well, now I'm afraid to date anybody. And I just kind of, I like angry laugh. Like, if you're afraid to date people because you're worried that people will say that you're sexually assaulting them, you have a problem that you need to be addressing. And so I do want to say that a couple of the friends who have come forward after I have shared my story recently have said things like, well, I was there, I don't remember it like that. I want to address that too, because when we look back at things in the past, and when we look at our own behavior, the behavior of people we love, people that we're partnered with, people who we've built a life with, you know, yes, people do make mistakes. Yes, they may have not understood consent when they were growing up, or maybe they thought that that was okay somehow. It's not, but maybe they didn't know yet. Maybe you pushed somebody because you really wanted something for your own needs, whatever. It's possible that you are someone's Kavanaugh. It's possible that in someone's life, something that you may not even remember, you may have pushed them, and you may have assaulted someone. That doesn't make you an evil person, but you do need to be aware of the fact that if you have that fear as someone hearing these accusations coming forward, if you're afraid of that, you really need to take a minute and sit with that discomfort. You need to say, what about my behavior is making me feel this way, and who do I need to apologize to? It's okay to admit that you did something wrong. And I mean, there are a couple of situations from my own history. Even if the person that I was talking about in that post came to me and said, I read your post, that was me, I am so sorry, I would be okay with that discussion. It's recognizing the things that we have done to harm other people, because nobody's perfect. Apologize for those things, move forward, but figure out why you're so worried.
Yeah.
Figure out why you're so worried about that, and maybe sit with that for a minute. What could you be doing better or differently?
Well, and the other problem with that hashtag is the privilege. It's the lack of understanding privilege, right? Yeah. So again, we do have victims of sexual assault who are male. At the same time, those statistically, they are also perpetrated on by males for the majority. I mean, for most of it, right? So I don't have statistics in front of me in regards to that, but so usually it's males in privileged positions and power positions that are able to perpetrate. And I was having this discussion with a person in my life who is a man and has privilege, and he was kind of sharing this type of concern. And I said, okay, well, let's just go back into both of our histories, right? So me as a fairly, well-educated, came from a fairly, middle class socioeconomic background, had lots of opportunities. So I'm not necessarily, a minority or in poverty or anything like that, just kind of run-of-the-mill American type of lifestyle that I've lived. And I can count at least 4 or 5 unwanted, what I would consider serious sexual assaults in my life. Okay. And how many can you count? Right. How many times have you been in a position where you felt like somebody was like you couldn't escape, or you didn't know what to do because either a man or a woman was trying to come onto you, especially in dating life or things of that nature. And he couldn't come up with any, right? And so, and granted, these are just 2 people, but I'm just saying in general, if you talk to females, if you talk to lesbians, homosexuals, queers, transgender folks, if you talk to minorities, especially like Black women, Hispanic women, if you get to like some of the other issues in society, like areas of poverty, etc.
Right.
All of those are intersections of privilege, right? And more than likely, those people are going to have more accounts than people who are in positions of privilege. And right now, whether we like it or not, it's like, white men in this country tend to have a lot more privilege than those who are not. It's kind of like with the Black Lives Matter, like Black Lives Matter hashtag. Well, then all lives matter hashtag. And it's like, well, that's not really the point. It's like, duh, we all know that all lives matter. Hello. Like, nobody is saying that one life is more important than another life. That's not the point of the hashtag. The point of the hashtag is to bring attention to a certain segment of the population that doesn't enjoy the same level of privilege than the other segment of the population. And the same thing with this, so the him too would be extremely frustrating as well, because it ignores privilege. The best cartoon I saw to talk about this, it's like all houses matter, right? And there were these two houses and one's on fire, but they're putting water on both of them.
Right.
And it's like, yes, like, all houses matter, but one of them isn't on fire and it doesn't need the water.
Right? Exactly. And realistically, like, again, if you are concerned, well, if you have that like gnawing pit in your stomach of like, what if somebody has an allegation about me? Maybe sit with it for a minute, figure that out. Is there someone that you need to apologize to? Is there something you need to change about the way that you date? Is there something that you need to change about the way that you treat your spouse or partner? What about your behavior is making you have that fear? And I think we all live in fear of that. Like, what if I did something and I didn't know? Well, if you didn't know, you didn't know. However, no means no. And yes, more importantly, yes means yes. So it's, when it comes down to it, what we need to be doing is we need to be assessing our own behavior, our own biases, and the things that we do or don't understand about sexual relations with other people, and our encounters thereof. And we also need to be teaching our kids these things, because I mean, I grew up in a wonderful place. I had a great childhood and I loved my friends. And still, even though we all had wonderful parents and everything was great, I still had somebody who pushed and who it was an attempted rape. So, I mean, it happens to everybody. So we need to really be more aware of the way that we view things and the way that we interact with other people.
Couldn't agree with any of that more. So let's see, Ashley, I think you're back. So are you able to?
Sorry about that.
Where are we at on time? I don't have a lot.
We're actually a little bit over.
A little bit over time. Okay, is there any pressing question or comment that you saw that we absolutely have to address? Or do you
because you guys actually answered all of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Through your discussion.
All right. Well, we're going to call it a night then. We hope that you've enjoyed this program. Again, I just want to remind people to, if you consider this a valuable resource and you want to support it, please do so. Please, there's all different levels of subscriptions, everything from $2 a month, which in essence would kind of give you this free podcast or free video, or whatever you want to call this, to up to $25 a month. And even if you think about that as being the biggest subscription, when you think about how much that costs you for a whole year, that would be less than just a session or two with a professional. So hopefully I'm offering enough resources and offering enough as part of the subscription that you find that valuable. And if that's not the case, then please let me know. But I am getting good feedback from those who are subscribers. And if we want this project to survive, then it needs your support. So I would hope that you would be willing to offer that. I love doing it. I love bringing on all kinds of topics. This was one where I am decidedly feisty. And I can feel it in my energy. So I'm not maybe as calm and as fun loving as normal, but there's a time and a place, people. There's a time and a place.
It's appropriate.
And as we mentioned several times tonight, correct feistiness and anger is very informative, and context is appropriate and actually very helpful. So take that with a grain of salt. Anything else you want to add, Ashley, before we take off? Okay, well, she froze up again, so we'll just ignore Ashley, and we will. Aubrey, again, thank you so much. You brought
Thank you for having me.
Context. Glad so much that you're out there doing the work that you're doing, supporting others, and I'm also very happy to hear that you are well on your way in your own journey as far as self-acceptance and healing and all of that. So
thank you.
Take
Thank
care
you
of
for having
yourself.
me. This is good.
All right, take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.